Hi everyone, welcome virtually to Mysterious Galaxy, and thanks for joining us for tonight's Orbit Live event with Brent Weeks and Andrea Stewart. Brent Weeks is the author of the Night Angel trilogy and the Lightbringer series, which is now concluded with The Burning White, out in paperback this month. Andrea Stewart is the author of The Bone Shard Daughter, her debut novel, which comes out in September. If you click on the Order Signed Books link at the bottom of the screen, you'll be able to order signed copies of both of those books from Mysterious Galaxy. Brent will be signing and personalizing book plates, and Andrea will be signing hardcovers of The Bone Shard Daughter. Instructions are on the Mysterious Galaxy website at that link. This event is part of Brent's Burning White paperback tour, and there are 3 more events coming up. They're all open to the public, so check out the listings on the event description if you'd like to join some of those other events. Of course, if you're buying a copy of the book, you should do that through Mysterious Galaxy tonight. This event is being recorded on Crowdcast, so if you have to leave early, you can always come back and watch the replay after it's over. You can also share the event with your friends after the fact using the same link that you used to get in today. Brent and Andrea are going to be talking about magic systems in fantasy, as well as writing sophomore novels. They'll also be taking your questions. I see that a few of you have already entered questions. If you haven't yet, you can click on the Ask a Question button to add your own. You can also vote on everyone else's questions, so the most popular ones are at the top, and Brent and Andrea will probably answer them first. And now I am delighted to turn things over to Brent and Andrea. Take it away.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Nice to meet you, Andrea. This is actually the first time we have spoken. So
yeah, nice to meet you too.
Well, thank you. So I have to say I was your book isn't out yet, so lovely cat. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing yet, but I did get my hands on the sample chapter of it. And first thing that struck me is one, you're coming out in hardcover. That's awesome, and I don't know. I probably shouldn't try to show this on screen, especially because I can't see my thing. But like the first thing I open the first page and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Like even the font is awesome that they picked for you. So can anybody see that? Am I holding it in the right place? I can't see my own screen. So like the F is super cool, and it looks like Orbit has just done a beautiful job for you, bringing it out in hardcover and doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, I really love
Can you tell me a little bit about this?
About the cover, or
well, just about your process of getting picked up and going hardcover and working with Orbit.
It was interesting. So it's the 7th book that I've written. So it took me a while to get there. I remember when I wrote my first book and I finished it and I was like, oh, this is it. That's the hardest part. And then I started querying agents, and that was really hard. I didn't get an agent with that book, so I wrote another book. Didn't get an agent with that one, wrote another one. Got an agent with that one finally, and and then I had some books go out on submission and nothing happened. And I kind of sat with that for a while and thought about, what were my weaknesses? What did I need to fix? How could I write something better that would actually get picked up? Because I know people say a lot of it is luck, and I'm sure that a lot of it is. But I thought if I could get better, then maybe my luck would improve. So
right.
Yeah. So then when we took this one out on submission, things actually started happening really fast, which was a very nice change from the previous books. But yeah, that's kind of the short, condensed version of it. And then sold to Orbit.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh no.
Yeah. Do you have any particularly brutal rejection letters that you got?
Oh no, I think my agent kind of protected me from all that.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, the stuff that I got was pretty polite,
Okay. Yeah. Well, I remember. Well, I just remember sending things out to agents, and I think I sent out to 33 agents, and I'm still waiting to hear back from 15 of them. So any day now. But I remember getting my, this was back in the day when you sent a self-addressed stamped envelope and getting like they took a rubber stamp saying not interested and they stamped it on my own envelope. Like they didn't even stuff a letter in there. They just stamped it on there and sent it to me, like the outside of the thing. And I was like, okay, great.
That is brutal.
Thanks for that. like you couldn't even have the intern open it up and stick anything in there, just like stamp the outside. I was like, oh yeah, someday when I'm rich and famous, I will not work with you. But I've never had the chance to do that. But anyway, I just have to say, for your book is coming out like September 8th or something. Is that right?
Yeah, September 8th in the US and the 10th in the UK. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, so fantastic. Well, I from reading the first chapter, it does not read like a debut novel. It reads like somebody who has worked on
has written on 7 books.
Well, no, it has a lot of polish, and so that's fantastic. I was like looking at how you set up the world. You do this. You do wonderful things with just mentioning lots. Like you don't get bogged down in detail, but you do these little telling details in passing that very quickly help the reader situate themselves in the world. So it's like, okay, we're talking to Dad, and he's disappointed, and he's very powerful. And where are we? And you pop in this thing. Okay, teak. Okay. As the sparrow, tea, abacus, like you just have these tiny little details that don't slow us down, and then your similes and metaphors are also in world, and they just instantly sets the stage and is just really, really skillful. And so that is something somebody does not usually do on their freshman novel, I guess, if we're using the freshman sophomore metaphor. So I found that really skillful, and all that work that you've done on those novels that are sadly crying out to see the light of day, that it wasn't wasted. So I was very impressed.
Well, I really appreciate that. They will never see the light of day. No, they were. I mean, yeah, it's at the point where I'm like, it's not. Yeah, no. Mm-mm.
Right. So can you tell me a little bit about the magic system in your world here?
Oh yeah. So when I first started thinking about it, because I know like for me anyways, I don't know about how you do it. When I'm thinking about a magic system, I usually want to think about like what is fueling it, where is it coming from. And the first thing I was thinking was I wanted it to come from shards of bone. And I wanted it to be powering these constructs because I just thought that would be fun and creepy. And then I started thinking,
are these like golems? Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah,
so
they're
somewhat
like
different
pieced
than that?
together from pieces of dead animals, basically just sewn together. Okay. So so I was thinking about that, and then I started thinking about the mechanics of it. Like they have to, so these bone shards come from living people, and that's the only way they'll work because these constructs are powered by their life essence. And on these shards are written commands. So, and those commands are set in a hierarchy as well. So I was thinking a little bit about like software programming, where it's kind of like a different language, but it has its own like logic and everything. And depending on how complex or complicated those commands are, sometimes people can subvert them or confuse the construct. So it's like things like that. So I kind of like to play around with like the logic puzzles. So yeah, so that's kind of how I came up with that. I wanted to ask you about yours too, with the Luxon. So I read the Night Angel trilogy and I loved it. And then I started your Lightbringer series, sorry. And I was just...
People do that all the time, including me. So
I remember starting out reading it and then reading about like the Luxon and then finding out that it comes from light. And I was just kind of wondering like how you came up with that idea. And then did you, because, I'm on your last book now, and, there's all this stuff that has become uncovered throughout. And I was wondering, like, did you map that all out beforehand? Like, how did you come up with that, and how did you map that out, and how?
Well, I first started with, I thought, at least in my own reading, it had been a long time since anybody that I had read or was aware of had done color magic. And I really like the idea of color magic because I have this tendency, which you have seen by now if you've read that many books of mine. Thank you, by the way, toward complexity. So when you have a huge amount of complexity in your world, you need to give readers, or it's very helpful to give readers places to anchor that. Like, okay, there's 25 things over here. If there's no real world anchors for that, readers just can't remember it, and it just becomes confusing. And so I thought, okay, if I have 7 different magic systems or 7 different kinds of magic, if they're not anchored to something, readers have no chance. But if I anchor them to color, then the complexity can be handleable. So like, okay, red magic, well, if that's warm and emotional, like, well, that makes sense to people. And green magic, okay, if that's wild, well, like trees and plants are wild, okay, I got it. I can it just gives a mnemonic hook, I guess, for readers. And I wanted to start simple and then layer on top of that. So you start at that level. Okay, we take a candle and we run it backwards. So instead of a physical thing turning into light and heat, we take light or heat and we turn it into a physical thing. So that seemed pretty simple. And then I wanted to map on top of that. Okay, now each of those luxins has its own kind of weight. It has its own properties. It has its own smell. It has, et cetera, all the physical properties. And then I wanted to, as we went through the series, because that's a ton of complexity already, and epic fantasy in particular has to like explain things all the time, without bogging things down. I had very early on the idea of the outer spectrum colors, i.e., beyond the visible spectrum, that what humans can see. But I was like, I'm not even going to talk about those early because we've got our plate full. And so a fair amount of it I definitely had worked out beforehand, and then absolutely a lot of it, like how it was going to work together, or making sure I was consistent with how I did it. I filled in as I went, and like, okay, this is more interesting. This is more interesting. And I still look back to book 1 and go, I really could have done that better. I could have onboarded readers to this, to how this magic works. Like, I just could have done that better. Dang it! Can I please go back and revise?
No.
Yeah, there is definitely that sitting there of like, that I made that more complicated at the beginning than it had to be. But so it's kind of a mishmash, and I still live in the fear that like I made some really glaring, obvious error, and somebody's going to catch me on it someday. But so far I'm doing all right.
Well, I haven't noticed anything yet. So I'm not one of those like super picky readers that goes through and like knows all the details. So, but I thought that was really interesting about, because like I remember when I was reading it, I was like, oh, okay, there's like the 7 magics. And then reading further and getting into the non-visible spectrum, I was like, oh, that makes sense. But it felt like a reveal, like a discovery, which I think is like part of the fun of coming up with elaborate magic systems. So, yeah.
Well, so this ties into a little bit of the sophomore novel stuff. Like when I part of the reason I wanted to hold off on some of that magic, and like I don't even know how much I mentioned some of the outer spectrum magic was I have felt like in my own reading, which again, there's lots of things I haven't read, but that like a lot of times an author kind of unveils all this cool bag of tricks that they've been working on for years in book 1, and then the second book is just like, okay, and then everybody kind of deals with it, and then the third book is the finale, and I wanted to have that the joy of discovery of like, oh, there's still more world. Oh, there's still more magic. And like, this was mentioned, but I didn't see it before. And oh, this makes sense of things. So that was part of how I solved that sophomore slump puzzle for myself with these books of there's going to be a lot of this magic that I've got in mind, but you're not going to get to discover it until there's a plot reason for us to come across it. So I kind of introduced that a little later on purpose so that we would still have that joy of discovery or that readers would hopefully still have the joy of discovery as the world kind of opens up as you go along.
So that was something you were really kind of thinking of when you were, because I had wanted to ask about that, like what you were thinking of like wanting to do in your sophomore novel, and then what were you thinking about really wanting to avoid? Like what kind of traps were you thinking like, oh, I've seen this kind of thing trip up other authors. I really don't want to do that in mine.
Well, yeah,
this may be for my own use.
I guess the biggest thing was, and it's, I wish I could come up with really fancy terms of art for this, but like, I didn't want the second book to suck. You know, like it was sort of like it had felt many times to me like the author spent 10 years on the first book, and then they got a deal, and then they had to turn in the next book in 9 months, and they didn't have any ideas, and they just like crapped it out, and then the third book hopefully was more interesting because you had the finale, and I was like, I don't want to do that, and I remember I was in college, dating myself here, and George Martin's second book came out, which I forget, Game of Thrones. I don't remember what the second one was called. And I remember thinking,
yeah,
okay, thank you, Clash of Kings, and I was like, you know, and I was like, what was it, 1997 or 1998 or something, and I was like, the second book is better than the first book. Like, you can actually do that. Like it can actually get better as you go along. Oh, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And so everything in me has always been like, I need to figure out how to make that second book really pay off for readers and just be really interesting. So and what I've done in my work to do that is really painful, and that's been like just write slowly enough that I get it right. So, and I thought after I wrote the Night Angel trilogy, I thought, oh, I'm a pro now. You know, I've done 3 books, and that took me 6 years. But like now I know what I'm doing. I'll just write a new series in a new world, and I'll be able to do a book a year. And then I'll be back to Night Angel in 3 years. That'll be great. And instead it took me 2 years per book, and it was really scary, but I just took the time.
They were kind of big books too, so
well, yes. I when you look at the page count, I'm not actually a slow writer, but when you look at the publication schedule, it seems a little slow. I've had writers be like, you don't have a book a year coming out, really? But and just say that to me like it's career suicide. And that'll certainly, when pros talk to you and look at you like you're doing something incredibly stupid, that's really scary. But different things work for each of us, I think, and you kind of have to roll with what works for you. So hey, more power to those people who write shorter books than I do and write a book a year, 2 books a year, 4 books a year. Wow, I envy them often. But I'm not those people. So how's your this book's coming out September 8th. How's the next book going? How's that?
Oh, I'm in the middle of Oh no. I started writing that like right away. So that's, the draft is finished, and I've been rewriting and revising. So I finished like rewriting a bunch of it because I went back and I read it and I realized that it's not really lining up with what I wanted it to be like. So I tossed out like probably like a fifth to a quarter of it and basically rewrote it. So I did that, and now I'm in the middle of just going back through it with my revision checklist and kind of making it line up to what I want, like the end kind of synopsis to be like. So it's going. And I had a plan from the beginning, at least. So I have stuff that I've set up in the first book that is gonna be happening in the second book. But one of the things I did do, which maybe I don't know if I should admit, is like I went and I looked up my book title on Twitter, and then I saw some people were saying like, oh, like I can't wait for the XYZ thing to happen in my second book. And I was like, actually, I should probably have that happen. So yeah, like this doesn't interfere with my plans, and actually that's something I think people are looking forward to, so I should make sure that's in there. So yeah, sure. I don't know, that may be ill-advised, but
no, I think it's like one of the big things that, especially in fantasy, because there's so much we have to explain. There's so much, exposition for the term of art that not everybody here might know, but like there's so much we have to explain that it's good to check back in with readers and like be like, are you getting it? Like if you're a teacher, and I was a teacher for a little while, like, or if you're a speaker, like you look out at the faces of the crowd, and either they're nodding and they get it, or they're talking to the person next to them because they're bored, or they look completely confused, or like some feedback is really helpful. And like obviously the feedback once you publish your book especially can be really unhelpful. And but like if you have 400 reviews and 300 of them mention that all the names started with A, like you might be like, oh, like maybe I should visit that, even if in this culture that I'm writing a ton of names start with A. Like there's things where you can be like, if a bunch of people mention that, maybe I should take that into account. And then there's other things where you're like, yep, that thing bothers you, good. And like because it's supposed to bother you. And then there's other things you're like, that hurts my feelings, and well, I just got to sit with that. And so man, reviews are or what people say on Twitter can be really something to navigate, but it can be really valuable to you too. So I think,
yeah, I mean, I think at this point, like,
I really want to hear from this character, then you go, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. So that's great. What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just saying, I think at this point, I have a pretty thick skin, so it doesn't bother me too much when I see like a negative review. It's not for me, it's for other people that have similar tastes, and it's not going to be for everybody, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
So I had a question. If you are dealing with I think when I first saw your magic system described someplace, it talked about like the computer programming kind of language, and something that I struggled with in Lightbringer, and I wonder if you had some of these similar struggles, was how do you deal with something that's fairly recent tech, or that's fairly scientific. And like we have currently a specialized vocabulary that we use to speak about that, but that people 400, 500, 600 years ago, whatever your world is set at, they wouldn't have spoken about the same thing the same way. How do you speak about those things without breaking immersion, or do you feel like you just sidestep that completely?
I feel like I personally sidestepped it mostly. Okay. I think I might have referred to programming the constructs more than once. I don't remember. I'd have to go and see what my word choice was. Right. But I did talk about like, engraving like the commands and everything on there, which I think is like fairly universal as far as yeah, so it's like not too techy, I think.
Okay.
How about you with like all the light and everything, as you're talking about like ultraviolet and all of that? And
I mean, I'm talking about particle waves, and it's like you can't say particle waves, right? like it. Right. It's not a concept we had until the early 1900s. So if you're having people in the I felt like I could cheat a little bit. I had some things like I'm looking up tech and like I have people with colored lenses, and people didn't develop in our world the technology to do colored lenses other than green until after the time frame that my world happens. But I was like, well, okay, I cheat by 100 years because that tech is so important to that world that they developed some of those things earlier. So like on some of those things, I felt I could cheat and get away with that. Like, oh, that's so terrible. We didn't have red lenses until 1700 rather than 1600. Go away. But on other things, I was like, okay, I can't talk about when I'm talking about wavelengths. I've got to be really careful or refer to this in different ways, and so I had to kind of or when I well, I guess I shouldn't say this, but it's a spoiler. When I'm talking about people dealing with radiation, it's like they don't understand what's going on in the world. Just like people who handle this get cancer, and they realize that. Like eventually they realize, and their families get cancer, and there must be something messed up about this. And like if you read it with a scientific background, you go, oh my gosh, this is like Marie Curie with holding radium. Like don't do that. Don't hold radium. But you can't explain it in world, because in world they wouldn't know it. And so I had some things like that were like, this would be a 2-sentence explanation if I could just use current scientific jargon.
Right, but instead you have to go into the background.
I can't. so that was really tricky for me at certain times. So I you're lucky if you can dodge around that, which is, I mean, when you say logic puzzles, of course, logic puzzles totally make sense. That feels a little different. It just goes in a different category in my brain anyway than programming, even though they're kind of the same. The logic puzzle seems timeless. Yeah. So yeah.
Should we take questions or?
Sure.
Okay.
Why don't you grab one? I thought I had.
Sure. Okay, so the top question is, how important is prose to you? Do you use a certain style of prose to convey information, or just for the beauty of the words, or is it even a consideration? Lastly, is prose something you fret over as you write, or something you refine after a vomit draft?
Please.
Okay. I think for me, I mean, prose is very important in the sense that I think narrative flow is very important. I think it is important to convey information and for it to hopefully be beautiful. But I think for me, like, the thing that's really important is, does it lead the reader into the work? Is it immersive? Does it interfere with that immersion at all? So I really try to make sure that the prose is smooth. Sometimes, like, I get a little bit like, oh, like, I really like this turn of phrase here, or this alliteration. I mean, I don't know if anybody else appreciates it the way that I do, but yeah, I mean, I don't feel like I am particularly. I know, like, some writers that I've read their work that I'm like, wow, everything that they've written here is just beautiful and gorgeous. I don't really feel like my work is that way. As far as whether it's something that I fret over as I write or something I refine after a vomit draft, I try not to fret over it as I write, but I try to not make it terrible, so I don't have to do too much work on it later. But I think for me, like, with the first draft, like, the goal is just to get words on the page, because a lot of times things are going to end up having to be rewritten. I say that passive voice, but it means I'm doing it. But yeah, so I try not to fret over it. Sometimes I get something out really nicely the first time, but that's not always the case. So how about you, Brent?
Right. I've changed a little bit over the years. I think when I was writing Night Angel, I really was trying to have my prose be invisible. I like my style was to try to make it just be like, you are there. You're not noticing, oh, Brent is such a beautiful stylist, and like I just want to slow down and come out of the world to like appreciate how brilliant Brent put this. I was like, that is breaking the reader out of the world, and I want him to stay in there the whole time. So if it's too flowery, it's gone. And which also I was, I was 25 years old, so it sort of fit me more to immerse readers in the action and go from there. And certainly on rewrites when to differentiate the prose from the dialogue, like I would revisit the dialogue and make sure that the various characters sounded like hopefully different than the other characters, and then some characters would have a different vocabulary or a different style of speaking than other characters. As I've gone along in my career, it's pardon me. I've taken a little bit different tack of like, there's places where if I'm trying to evoke the beauty of a setting, and it is impacting the characters, like what they see, then at that point I'm going to be like, okay, if it's impacting the characters, I want it to also impact the reader, and not just describe how the characters feel. I want to help the readers experience what the characters are feeling at the same moment. So there's a time to break down and try to make the prose more beautiful. And there's certainly places where I will I'll vomit out a phrase that almost really works. Like almost that you would see in a speech. And I'll be like, okay, and I'll try it a couple different ways, and I'll be like, okay, I'm getting hung up on this, and I'll just leave myself a note like, this is almost really quotable. Keep going, come back to this and see if we can get this right. And so there are times where I will where I'll revisit things that I feel like I feel like that's kind of encapsulates something kind of smart or kind of cool or very pithy or something. I try not to do it in places where, oh man, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. So I'm not going to use the really good example that's in my mind. Like I feel that there are places where I've come across writers who fall in love with their own with the beauty of their language at the expense of the story, and you're like, yeah, that's the author talking to me right there, and he knows he's going to be quoted. And that's not exactly how the character would put that, because I spent a lot of pages with that character, and that's the author knows he's going to be quoted. And lots of readers do quote it, and but for me it goes like, I go -1, just mentally. I can get really judgy as a reader, but I try not to do it publicly. So that's kind of my experience for Joey. Joey, let's go. By the way, great question. That's my experience with that. I'll revisit those things, but I try to look at the purpose that this thing is serving in the overall narrative first. Okay. Oh, the second question is for you, so I'll be happy to ask it. Andrea, if it's not too much of a spoiler, could you sing the song about is it Jovis?
Yes, it's Jovis. So
thanks, Lizzie. That's awesome.
I think I have like 3 lines or 4 lines from the song that are actually in the book, and I have to say that is all that I've written of it. And also I have no idea what it sounds like. It's like jaunty and it's folksy and it's catchy. That's all I know. I'm not musically inclined. So I'll read the part that is in the book.
Oh, nice.
So this is the part in the book. It just says, he steals your children, sets them free. The construct's power source they'll never be. He's a star in the sky, the twinkle in your eye. He's Jovis. And that, I believe, is probably like the refrain or the end of the song. But don't know what the rest of it is. I'm sure it's wonderful.
That's awesome. Well, like that's enough. Like it's as writers, we we don't have to create the whole thing. We create the snippets, and like I know that like I actually met the guy who was in charge of making the language Dothraki for George R. R. Martin for the show. And so he goes and talks to George, and he's like, so George, what can you tell me about the language? And George is like, yeah, everything that I thought about it is already on the page. I don't know. I have no idea. like it was just like, he didn't make up a whole language. He's not Tolkien. I mean, like there are people who make up a whole language, or there are people who will write whole songs, or there are people who are archaeologists, and they will use that in their work. There are people who are programmers. There are people who are this or that or the other thing, and they'll use that to infuse their work. And if you're not all those other things, like it's okay. Like you're making up a whole world, and we are like, the beauty of it is we trust readers to like make this up. Like if it sounds rhythmic and lyrical, like it does, it's like, okay, readers, like come up with something in your own head, and that's on you because it's a book. And I don't have to sing it.
I mean, I always feel terrible for the audiobook narrators, though, when there's like a piece of a song in there, and I'm like, oh, it's a little bit awkward. They don't really know what the tune is, or they have to make something up. So, yeah. So I don't know. I'll have to hear that part when the audiobook comes out.
So have you thought? Have you thought about the audiobooks as you've written? Is that something that's been occurring to you as you write, like how it sounds, or?
Well, I mean, no, because when I wrote the first one, I was like, I don't even know if this is gonna happen. I started writing like a different book right after it went out on sub, because I was like, well, who knows if that's gonna sell. I know they did have me do a pronunciation guide. I don't know if they did the same thing for you. And I realized I didn't actually know how a lot of the stuff was pronounced. Do you know how like all your names and everything are pronounced? And do you have that in your head, or?
Most of them. And I don't know why I did this early on, but like, I guess I was oddly fearless, and like, I asked to talk to the guy. Well, actually, I know why I did it. And has it been long enough that I can actually tell? Well, so the first audiobook came out at this. I sort of feel like I can say negative things once they've been papered over, and enough years have passed. So the first book, the Black Prism, came out at sort of this weird time in the audiobook market, and it was like there'd been the recession, and everybody was trying to figure out ways to save a dollar. And audiobooks had not taken off, like not nearly like what they are. So everybody was trying to figure out how to save a buck. So they stopped going with the really experienced narrators, and they went with people who are newer. And so I got a narrator for that first book who did his absolute best. He was a younger guy, younger actor. He gave it his all. And I have no I fault him not at all. He did the best he could. But there's a difference between the best somebody can do and the best in the field, and he was not the best in the field. And and the audiobook market started. So readers were not super happy about the first book, and I quietly told Orbit, can we maybe do something about this? And it was sort of like, well, it's a sunk cost. Like that's probably not going to happen. And then I got Simon Vance for the second book, and I called him up, and I said, could I just talk to him? So I had this amazing talk with Simon Vance, who I did not realize what a big deal he was. So which was probably good. So we had this lovely talk. He went through all the pronunciations with me. He said some of them, and this was like, I had kind of an idea of how I wanted to do things, but like he said something, and I was like, that actually sounds better than what was in my head. So let's go with yours. And so we had this wonderful little collaboration of things, and then it came out, and readers loved it, of course. And then eventually Orbit went back, and they got Simon to do the first book. So so every time a new book would come out, Simon and I would have a conversation. I actually would give him kind of the inside scoop on things and be like, well, in case this changes how you perform this, I've got this twist coming up 2 books from now, and this is going to happen. And so incorporate that if you want to. And he's such a consummate professional that he did, and he did a beautiful job with it. So I had a very strange experience with, and wonderful experience with it. So if you can talk to the person, oh man, that's wow. It's been really nice for me. But it's pretty rare, apparently. I don't know. Simon, I think he told me that he's recorded probably 800 audiobooks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, under several different names, because it used to be like you'd have a name under one company, and then you couldn't keep the same name when you went to another. So he might be the world's most prolific audiobook narrator. But he said I and Christopher Priest were the only 2 authors who called him up, and so out of all of those, and I was like, oh, I guess I'm cheeky or something. So, but he's great. So. Yeah, so I did do a long thing of like, here's a pronunciation guide for all these weird things, and then we talked. So yeah,
that's really cool.
It's yeah, but certainly like I write certain things, and I go like I think about like, oh, this double meaning. I mean, like, it's not always a pun, like often it is, because I kind of do the dad joke thing, but like I'll have double meanings, and I'll be like, that won't translate. And so you think about translations of your book, and you go, should I change it? And like at this point, I'm just like, I'm not changing it. But you do start to think about those things. You think like, how will that sound? And then I even made, I've probably made, well, I'll call it a mistake. The things I mildly regret anyway, like white, WIGHT, and white, which my magic system white definitely shows up. It's like now I think like, why did you do that, you numbskull? Like people are listening to this and they have no idea which one you're talking about. Like do something different. And I was so pleased with white, WIGHT, using that in my world. And it's like, now I'm like, that was just a bad decision. So
I've
so
listened to the audiobooks though, and you can generally tell from context. So it's not
right.
Yeah. But I do remember that occurring to me, like, oh, that's interesting. Was that on purpose?
Right. No, I should have just been like, no, you use the old English pronunciation, like Wiggett, like you do night as knigget, but too late. So sorry, you're saying?
The next question is actually for you specifically.
Okay.
So it says, Brent, how did you develop a religious system around a light-based magic system without falling into
manichaeism.
Manichaeism or
okay.
gnostic dualism. Okay.
Wow. How did I do it? I'm trying not to be cheeky here. I really wanted to examine power structures in the world and to think about like what happens when you have magic users in the world, and in a lot of the fantasy that I've read or that I read when I was growing up, like I just thought it didn't make sense. Like if you had magic users, like people would either want to co-opt them or be terrified of them or some amalgam of both of those things. Like if there were people who I think it was like C.S. Lewis said something once, like, we don't not burn witches now because we're so civilized. we don't burn witches because we don't believe in them. Which like the thought being like, if there were people who could literally make you miscarry and could literally make your fields die, and they were your nasty neighbors, and they would do these things, and they would magic you, and stuff in your life would go bonkers and go crazy and awful for you, you would be terrified of those people, and you would be incredibly hostile to them. And that really made sense to me. And so when I built the power structure in the Lightbringer world, I was like, these guys have co-opted magic, and like they are all about that. And so then I wanted to layer that in with how the magic system works, and then the just the moral layers to the world as well. And so that's a small part of the question, but I don't want to dominate the time. So thank you, Henry. That's a fantastic question, and very deep, and that's as far as I'll go with it for tonight. Thank you. Next one is for you, Andrea. Hi, Andrea. What gave you the inspiration for the keys?
Oh, so this is actually pretty simple. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to write for this book, I thought about a lot of the things that I liked to read and what kind of elements were really appealing to me. And I really like the idea of having somebody go through that process of discovery, where you're kind of unlocking one door after another and finding things behind those doors, and finding secrets that lead to other secrets. It's a little bit video game-ish in a way, but yeah, so that was kind of like my initial idea. And then I thought about, well, I always had the impression that her father disapproves of her, and that he's kind of holding stuff out on her, and that she's going to start stealing these keys so she can find out his secrets instead of waiting for him to tell her. So that was kind of my inspiration, was just that kind of process of discovery. I just kind of like that when I read that in other books, and I wanted to do that in mine.
It makes Lynn a really active character as well, which is wonderful. Like, she's gonna take control of her destiny, right? Like immediately, very very quickly, she's like, heck with this, I'm going to bang. I'm not gonna spoil even chapter 1, but like she goes out there. Can you explain for readers who don't have any idea what the keys are, just a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, so
what are the keys?
Basically, she lives in this palace of like locked doors and secrets. Her father has he does this bone shard magic, but nobody else knows how to do it. He's been teaching his foster son, but has refused to teach her. And basically they just go and disappear behind these doors, and she knows that like he's learning stuff she's not learning, and she doesn't know what's behind them or what he's hiding from her. So basically, when he approves of something that she does or something that his foster son does, he gives them a key, and they go and they find out which door it goes to and what he's allowed them access to. So there's like a little bit of a rivalry going on where she's trying to get as many keys as he has, and he's saying like, I'm going to be named heir and not you because I've got more keys than you. So I kind of like set it up like that.
Nice. No, that's it's really wonderful to give readers some of those like external signs of like, okay, we're marking what's going on in the plot. Like, bang, like you can count the keys. Like, oh my God, you're in trouble because you have fewer keys. Like there's a race here, and you're screwed if you end up too far behind. So that's a really nice way to to externalize a little bit the internal drama, or to just show the stakes. So I really like that. I like a lot of time I spend too much time in my characters' heads, and it's a it's just flaw. And I think like, okay, how can I dramatize this? You know, like let's do a drama. Let's like get out of his head. You know, like let's go. And so when I can come up with things like that, which I've never been that smart, but like that's
I would disagree, but
well done. All right. How many full drafts do you go to? AK asks, Andrea, how many full drafts do you think you went through before acceptance? I assume she or he means with this particular novel. Also, how much did your cats help or not help in the process?
This one was actually pretty easy. I wrote the first draft pretty quickly. I had it all outlined. And then I went back and I know I had to change one of the subplots that I was like, I don't know why he's doing this. This doesn't make any sense. So I had to go and fix that. And then I sent it to my agent, and then she had me do some like one round of revisions, which actually weren't that bad. And then it went out on submission. So it was actually a pretty quick process. I wrote it in like 3 months and then did revisions.
What?
And yeah, so the second book has been a little bit more of a struggle.
We were doing so well, and now I hate you. So sorry. Yeah, we're logging off. 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, this one was like, it was a lot. It was faster and easier process than some of my previous books have been. But like I said, I think like I'd kind of nailed down how to write a first book at that point. I'm trying to like figure out how to write a second one right now, but but yeah, so that actually didn't go through very many drafts. I think like a lot of it is the same from what I wrote the first time around, but I think like when I write a first draft or even like a second draft, I leave out a lot of explanation. So I had to definitely during edits, it was like, oh, like what did you mean here? What was going on here? And I'm like, oh, that was just in my head. I didn't actually put it on the page. So yeah, it tends to kind of get longer as it goes through revisions and edits.
So what have been some of the stumbling blocks for you as you've done, you know, your sophomore novel? What's been hard?
I think just figuring out, I think a lot of it has been figuring out what do I put in the second book and what do I put in the third book, and where do I draw that line between revealing too much in the second book or like being like too coy. That was a big issue. I knew like the general shape of it as far as, because when it went out on sub, I had written up like a little thing for, oh, this is what I'm intending to do in book 2 and this is what I'm intending to do in book 3. So I knew in general like what the large conflict was going to be, but I didn't know how that was going to pull together. So I think part of it for me was kind of detailing the exact structure of it and then figuring out what gets revealed and what gets withheld for book 3. I think that's been like the biggest.
Right.
Yeah, because you want a nice finale, but you also want your second book to be, good on its own and to have like a full arc. So yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, hopefully like I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, I know how to do a second book now after this one. I know it's like, I feel like a lot of times you're like, how to write book, you're like Googling that. So
I feel like something that I kept expecting that like all of the work I'd done beforehand would just magically make the next book easier. And I think somebody said something once, and I found it fairly true, at least for my workflow, is like every book is hard in its own way. It's just like, dang it, dang. So like, oh wait, it doesn't just become easy. And the truth is, I mean, at least if you're an artist, it's like if it becomes easy, you get bored, and so you just you try things that are harder until it's like, oh yeah, I know how to do this shape. I know of a novel. I know how to do a finale. but I have never done this, and I've never tried this thing, and I've never had a character like that, and I don't know if I could write a guy who comes from that background. And so you'll start adding complications to yourself until it's hard for you, and that's really what keeps us kind of that's what keeps me in the zone where I'm constantly terrified and totally engaged. So
it's good to know that I'm not the only one that's constantly terrified. So
oh no, that's the secret. Everybody who's any good is probably constantly terrified, and everybody who tells you they're not is 80% of those people are probably lying, because they're invested in the. There's this whole thing that just drives you bonkers, and it's like this thing of like author as genius, and it's like, oh yeah, I just had it all written in my head, and so I just wrote down the words. And it's like, well, why did it take you 3 years then? You know, it's like, well, I was tending my roses, I guess. You know, it's like, no, it's hard. And it should be hard. It takes a lot of work to do what we do. So,
oh yeah,
anyway, yeah, it's just a pet peeve. Oh, here's an easy one. Caps Lock asks, who is not possibly my assistant. Brent, what words of parenthood wisdom would you have for Andrea in these last weeks before she becomes a parent herself? You don't know me very well, do you? Wisdom? I have none of that. I have none of that. No, none of that. I wouldn't presuppose to give you to give you my parental wisdom. Except this. Once a child becomes old enough to get to your office and bang on the door constantly, but not old enough to understand what rules are, so maybe 16 or 18, depending on your kid, you might want to figure out a new office solution, which I built a little shed out in my I built a little writing shed out in my yard, and having just 13 steps of separation allowed me with my 2 children to stay sane, and my wife wasn't worrying about them bothering me, and I wasn't worrying about I'm not helping, the children are screaming, I'm really just kind of dinking in here and doing nothing. I'm a terrible dad. I'm also a terrible writer. So some separation once they reached that stage was very helpful for me. Not and it wasn't very much, you know. So I would recommend that. But as for wisdom, heck if I know. My first kid made me convinced that I was a really good parent, and that I just was just like I had this really rational older daughter. I mean, not all the time, but often I could just be like, I explain what the rule is, I explain the reason for the rule, and she kind of gets it, and she goes, okay, and then she kind of buys in. And I was like, parenting is so easy, just explain the rule and the reasoning for it, and your kid will buy in. And then my second daughter came along. And I became less convinced of my own brilliance as a parent. So yes, each child, as each book, is also wonderfully rewarding challenge. In their own way. Yes. All right, hold on. Let's skip down to one that can hit both of us. Okay, what are the hardest parts about writing your books? And I'll let you take this first.
Oh goodness. I think it depends on which one. Some like a lot of it, like whichever part I'm working on is what it kind of feels like. I think for me though, I would definitely have to say revisions are the hardest part, and not because they're actually hard, but because it's hard to make myself actually work on them. So getting that momentum and sitting myself down and being like, okay, you have to delete this stuff and replace it with other stuff, or you have to move this stuff around. That I think getting momentum on revisions is, I think, probably the hardest part for me. It's actually not that hard once I get started, but I always convince myself it's going to be super hard. So yeah.
Nice. That's interesting. So this is just how writers are different. Like revisions, I find are like the easiest part for me, and that's because for me, revisions are just hard work. And for me, the hardest part is like the first draft, like when there's nothing there, and like I will work all day and I'll write a sentence or three, or I'll write down 4 ideas and they're all bad, and then I come in and I'm like, what did I do today? Nothing. I'm a slug. I accomplished nothing. I'm done. My career is over. You know, why am I here on this earth? Whereas even as I'm writing every draft that I'm writing, I'll put down all these notes like, hey, fix this thing, or I don't like this character's name, but I don't know what name to do right now. Look up that culturally appropriate thing that fits into these parameters, and then I'll go on. And so I'll have I'll have like huge lists of notes like to myself, and then I put them into a big document, and I sort them into like big rocks, medium rocks, and little rocks. So the little rocks are the things that are just like, okay, that's super easy. It just is going to take me some time. And so some days I got nothing in the tank. I'll be like, okay, I can go through and look that, make sure that I didn't leave out the stutter for this character or whatever. Or a medium rock would be like, hey, I think that this character sounds too much like this character. I need to seek through the entire novel for every place where that character speaks, and I need to look at their dialogue and make sure that they sound like themselves. And then the big rocks will be things like I think this plot line is boring. You know, and so I'll just divide it up. But for me, that's sort of an easier part of it, because then I'm polishing what's there, and the hard part is the months I will spend early in a project where there's nothing there, and I'm like, is there ever going to be anything here? And you know, I've been writing for quite a few years now. I'm starting to believe in myself that I'll eventually get something there, but I'll still have those days where I'm like, that's it, I'm done. I'll never write another book. I don't know how to write books. I don't know how people write books. Clearly, I've only fooled people this far in my career. So that, like, emotionally, the early part of the books are usually the toughest for me. So okay, let's do you want to pick out one last one, since we're at an hour and 2 minutes?
Sure. Let me see if I can find one that's for
not just for me.
Okay.
No.
Okay, so this is interesting. Okay, so how accessible do you try to make your books that are later in a series? Like, example, book 3 for new readers. What sort of strategies do you employ to get the newbies up to speed without boring your established readers? Oh, that's a good question.
Oh, that is a good question. So for me, I don't at all try to help readers new readers get into book 3. Although I have had readers tell me that they've started with a second or third book of the series.
Really?
They're just like, how did that even go for you? Yeah, I didn't realize, or they didn't. The library didn't have book 1, so I just started on book 2. I'm like, what? But I do have the problem, especially because usually it takes me about 2 years to write a book, of like realizing that my audience is split. There are people who finished the last book yesterday, and there's people who haven't thought about it in literally 2 years, if not more. You know, maybe the book came out and they didn't think about it for a while. And it's like, how do you onboard those people without boring the people who just read it yesterday? And it's really challenging. I cheated in the last couple of books in a way that readers seem to really appreciate. Where I started, I had a little. I had a little breakdown of what had happened, a little synopsis of what had happened in the previous books, to be like, hey, you know, reminder, last time on this bat channel, you know, this is what we were doing, and readers seem to like that. But I still feel I want to give some again, like, mnemonic hooks for readers to be like, remember, this guy was the guy who was doing the thing, or remember, these people were doing this, and try to give those like as we go, because readers really don't these days. The audience just isn't in a place where they want to be lectured. You know, oh, we have an action scene, and then we sit down and go, hey, remember, Joe, what we were doing for the last 6 months, and then you talk about it for 5 pages. Readers have no time for that these days, and I'm I agree with them. I don't want to bore readers for 5 pages with that. And it's like, you know what? It's probably on Wikipedia if you want to look it up. You can find those things. And so I try to give little hooks as I go. What have you done, Andrea, in your sequel that you're writing right now?
Well, I kind of did the same thing, try to put in little reminders of what had happened while still keeping that forward momentum. I mean, I think like it's pretty natural for the characters to reflect a little bit on what's happened to them, and especially if that affects what's going on in the moment. So I kind of like pepper those in a little bit so that, you know, it kind of gives a reminder of like what happened, where they're at emotionally, like what has, you know, what's happened in the last book that is affecting what's happening currently. But I try not to, I mean, for me personally, I really don't like to slow things down to stop and be like, oh, so this
Right.
is what happened before, and this is why they're feeling this way. I think if you choose the right words sometimes or the right things that they remember, that it can help jog the reader's memory better. And that's a little bit difficult to do. I think that's been hard as well for the second book. But yeah, I have to say, I was starting your most recent book, The Burning White, and I did appreciate the little synopsis thing in the beginning that was like, this is what happened in the previous books. I was like, oh, this is a really nice reminder, because it's like, you know, it's been a little while since the first book. So yeah.
Right, absolutely. Well, Andrea, it's been awesome talking with you, and really nice to meet you, guys.
Yeah, it's great meeting you.
The Bone Shard Daughter is coming out very soon, and you can get that with our friends at Mysterious Galaxy. By the way, Mysterious Galaxy, thanks for having us. And I miss coming down and visiting you all. I'm really looking forward to seeing you again. There should be links somewhere obvious.
Yeah, there's
there
a
we go.
link on the bottom.
Right-hand
so
column.
order signed books. Yes.
Awesome. And I'll be doing some more of these in the coming weeks. And again, Andrea's got her book is coming out September 8th. So absolutely check that out. It's wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a joy.
Thank you for having us.